90 days ago, I buried a $30 bin in the ground with $20 of vegetables inside. Today, we open it. If this worked, it's the cheapest cold storage you can build. And I'll show you the temperature readings first. But what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about preserving food without electricity. Because a single buried bin can keep produce fresh for months using nothing but the earth itself. This is the buried bin root cellar. A method so simple that most modern homesteaders overlook it. But what I discovered over 90 days of tracking temperature, humidity, and spoilage could save you hundreds on electricity and make you rethink everything you know about cold storage. And it starts with a mistake I made on day one. That mistake was simple. I used the wrong bin. I grabbed a standard plastic storage tote, the kind you find in any big box store for $10, and buried it 3 feet deep in my backyard. What I didn't know at the time was that the lid on that bin wasn't airtight, which meant that groundwater seeped in during the first heavy rain. By day 10, half the vegetables were sitting in mud. I had to start over. That's when I discovered what actually works, and the difference came down to a single gasket seal that most people never think about. But before I show you the right way to build this, you need to understand why a buried bin even works. And that starts with a number that the modern food industry would rather you forget. 52 degrees. That's the average temperature of the Earth just a few feet below the surface, year-round, regardless of whether it's 100 degrees above ground or 20 below. Soil is the world's oldest and most reliable insulator, and for thousands of years, people used that fact to preserve food without a single watt of electricity. The Amish in Lancaster County still use root cellars today, the same way their ancestors did 3 centuries ago. They don't rely on refrigerators because they don't need to. They store potatoes, carrots, beets, and turnips in underground spaces where the natural humidity stays between 85 and 95%, and the temperature never rises above 40 degrees. That's the sweet spot, cold enough to slow respiration in the vegetables, humid enough to keep them from drying out. Get those 2 variables right, and you can keep produce fresh for months, not weeks. But here is the problem. Building a traditional root cellar costs thousands of dollars and requires land, permits, and serious excavation. That works if you are on a farm. It doesn't work if you are in a suburban backyard or renting a house with a small garden. The buried bin method solves that. All you need is a heavy-duty plastic container, a shovel, and a patch of soil. Total cost, $30. That's less than a month of electric bills for most refrigerators. The question I set out to answer was simple. Could a $30 bin really replicate the conditions of a $2,000 root cellar? And more importantly, could it keep vegetables fresh for 90 days straight without spoilage? On July 5th of this year, I buried the bin and filled it with carrots, potatoes, and beets purchased from a local farm. I dropped a wireless temperature and humidity sensor inside, sealed the lid, and covered it with a layer of straw and a tarp. Then I waited every week for 3 months. I checked the readings. What I found on day 30 made me realize this experiment was going to expose something much bigger than a simple storage hack. The temperature inside the bin that morning was 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it was 84. A 47-degree difference achieved with nothing but dirt and plastic. The humidity sat at 92%, right in the sweet spot. Not a single carrot had gone soft. Not a single potato had sprouted. I stared at the numbers on my phone and realized I had just built a refrigerator that cost exactly nothing to run. Consider what you pay to keep a standard fridge humming year after year. The average American household spends around $350 annually just on refrigeration electricity. Over a decade, that's $3,500. A buried bin costs $30 and demands 0 watts. The math is not complicated, but the implications are even bigger. Refrigeration, as we know, it has only been widespread for about 80 years. Before that, nearly every household in America had a root cellar or an ice house. My own grandparents kept potatoes in a dirt floor basement that stayed cool well into spring. The Amish in Lancaster County still use underground storage today, not as a hobby, but as a working necessity. And they can keep apples crisp until the following summer without a single electrical cord. This wasn't primitive, it was physics. The Earth, at 4 feet deep, holds a constant temperature of roughly 52 degrees all year. By insulating from above with straw and a tarp, that temperature can be nudged lower into the 32 to 40 degree range that halts respiration in root vegetables. It's the same principle that built Egyptian grain silos and Roman larders, and it works so well that modern agricultural researchers admit most root crops store best not in a fridge, but in exactly these conditions: cool, dark, and humid. But here is where the experiment took a turn I did not expect. My buried bin was outperforming every appliance in my kitchen. The beets at day 45 were still rock solid. The carrots still snapped. The potatoes showed no eyes. And yet, I started to notice a faint, sweet smell every time I lifted the lid. Nothing had rotted, but the sensor told me something was changing. The ethylene level inside the bin was rising. That's when I made the connection. Vegetables respire after harvest. They stay alive, and in a sealed plastic container, the gases they exhale have nowhere to go. A single potato that begins to age a little faster can release enough ethylene to trigger its neighbors into premature sprouting. I had built a near-perfect cold box, but I had also built a gas chamber. One wrong piece of produce could cascade through the entire bin, turning a 90-day storage solution into a 3-week compost heap. By day 60, 3 potatoes had softened, and I knew I had to fix the design or abandon the promise. What I found in an agricultural bulletin from 1912 changed everything. And it's a trick the Amish never forgot. The trick was sand, dry, clean builder's sand, packed around each vegetable individually. That bulletin from the Iowa Agricultural Experiment Station in 1912 tested 12 different storage methods for root crops. Sand layering outperformed every other technique, including wooden crates, straw packing, and even the clay seals, popular at the time. Root vegetables stored in sand lost less than 2% of their moisture after 4 months, retained full texture, and showed near zero sprouting. The sand absorbs excess humidity while preventing ethylene from pooling around the produce. It is a buffer, a respiratory moderator, and it costs $5 for a 50-pound bag. So on day 62, I dug out the bin and started over. I cleaned the container thoroughly, drilled 3 small drainage holes in the bottom, and added an inch of sand. Then I placed the carrots in a single layer, covered them completely with sand, added a layer of potatoes, more sand, beets on top, and a final sand blanket. I reset the sensor, sealed the gasketed lid, reburied the bin, and piled straw bales over the top. The wait began again. What happened next completely reframed this experiment. The temperature inside the bin stabilized at 34 degrees, even as overnight air temperatures dipped into the low 20s. The humidity rocketed up to 94%, but stayed constant. The sand moderated the microclimate so effectively that the daily fluctuations I had seen in the first 60 days simply vanished. The sensor graph went flat, like a heartbeat monitor for a machine that had found its rhythm. But the bigger revelation came from the Amish. A friend of mine who grew up in Lancaster County told me something I had never read in any modern homesteading book. Amish root cellars don't just use sand. They segregate their produce religiously. Apples go nowhere near potatoes. Onions have their own bin across the cellar. Carrots share a box only with beets. This is because different crops produce different quantities of ethylene and have different sensitivity thresholds. Apples are ethylene bombs. One bad apple can spike the gas levels enough to ruin an entire bin of root vegetables within 2 weeks. The Amish learned this through 3 centuries of trial and error, and they passed it down without writing a single word. This is the part that made me angry. Modern food storage advice tells you to throw everything in the fridge drawer and hope for the best. It tells you to buy airtight plastic containers and vacuum sealers and Bluetooth thermometers. It turns food preservation into a gadget race. But the actual solution is simpler and older than any of that. Sand, separation and soil, total additional cost $8. Total energy input 0. My bin on day 90 was functionally identical to a commercial walk-in cooler, minus the compressor noise and the electric bill. And the vegetables inside were alive, but sleeping. That's the secret. You are not trying to kill the produce. You are trying to slow its breathing to a near halt. Do that, and a carrot harvested in October can still snap in January. A potato can last until the next planting season. But there is a catch, and it's the same catch that makes root cellaring a form of quiet resistance in an age of just-in-time supply chains. If the grid goes down for a week, the food in your refrigerator is gone. If it goes down for a month, the food in your freezer is garbage. But a buried bin, layered with sand and covered with straw, continues working. No backup generator required. No solar panels necessary. Just physics and patience. And that brings us to day 90. When I lifted that lid for the final time, I was ready to declare mission accomplished. But what I actually pulled out of the sand changed my entire plan for next year's garden. On the morning of day 90, I pulled back the tarp and the straw, unscrewed the lid, and brushed away the top layer of sand. The first carrot I found was still cold to the touch, still rigid, still the same deep orange it had been 3 months earlier. It snapped in half with the same clean crack a garden-fresh carrot makes. The potatoes were firm, the skins tight, no wrinkles, no soft spots. The beets were so crisp they could have been pulled from the soil that morning. The bin had worked better than I had any right to expect. But as I dug deeper into the sand, I saw something that stopped me. The carrots had started growing tiny white root hairs, fine as silk, reaching into the sand as if they were still in garden soil. The potatoes had begun pushing out small eyes, not the long, wasted sprouts you see in a forgotten pantry, but tight, healthy buds ready to become plants. The vegetables were not just preserved. They were alive, in full health, and absolutely ready to be planted again. This is the detail that separates a true root cellar from a refrigerator. A fridge arrests life by brute force, cold enough to delay decay, but not gentle enough to preserve vitality. After 3 months in refrigeration, a carrot is dying. After 3 months in a sand-bedded buried bin, a carrot is still waiting for spring. The Amish have known this for generations. They don't just store food in their root cellars. They select their best potatoes, their strongest beets, their healthiest carrots, and they keep them in exactly the same conditions until planting season returns. The root cellar is not merely a pantry, it is a seed bank that resets itself every year without a single watt of electricity, without a laboratory, without a supply chain. Your grocery store, refrigerated produce will never give you next year's garden. A $30 bin full of sand will. I ran the numbers one last time. Total money spent, $38, including the sand and the straw bale. Total electricity used, 0. Total food preserved well enough to eat or plant, 100% of what I buried, minus 3 potatoes that I had removed in the first 60 days before the sand fix. Compare that to the refrigerator humming in my kitchen right now. Over the same 90 days, it consumed roughly 150 kilowatt hours of electricity, costing me about $22 just for the refrigeration load. In 1 year, my buried bin would pay for itself in avoided electric bills alone. And then it would keep paying out season after season with free storage and free seed stock. The buried bin root cellar is not a substitute for a refrigerator in every sense. It will not keep milk or meat, but for root vegetables, winter squash, and hardy fruits like apples and pears, it outperforms everything the modern appliance industry sells you. And it comes with a bonus no appliance can match. It makes you independent of the grocery store in a way that a fridge never will. When you open your bin in March and find carrots so alive they're ready to flower, you realize you've become a producer, not just a consumer. That was the real payoff of 90 days underground. And it's a lesson I am taking straight into next year's planting. Here is what I can't stop thinking about. Every year, millions of people pay hundreds of dollars to refrigerate vegetables that could have been stored in the ground for free, and the knowledge of how to do it never disappeared. It just got buried under a century of convenience. The Amish never forgot. They kept layering sand in their root cellars, while the rest of us forgot that a carrot is still alive. The buried bin is not a hack. It's a reconnection to something the modern food system tried to make obsolete, and it failed, because a $38 hole in your backyard can outperform a $2,000 appliance, and it can give you next year's garden without asking permission from a seed catalog. If this content made sense to you, there's a special offer I've put together through the link in the first pinned comment. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me what you would store first if you built one. And I'll see you in the next one. The shovel is waiting.